من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وعنده مفاتيح الغيب لا يعلمها إلا هو ويعلم ما في البر والبحر وما تسقط من ورقة إلا يعلمها ولا حبة في ظلمات الأرض ولا رطب ولا يابس إلا في كتاب مبين. So today, inshallah, we begin a new series which will discuss what I generically call Islamic spirituality. It's a very neutral title that hopefully is so ambiguous no one really knows exactly what we're going to talk about. And the reason I did that, and the reason we're calling it that, is that sometimes when you name things with a name that not everyone understands or conjures up certain background or baggage, you lose everyone. So there's no there's no confusion. We are going to be talking about tasawwuf for the next 2 to 3 months. Tasawwuf, tazkiyah, etc. And what I want to do is I want to talk about it from outside. So in other words, rather than talk about it as a practitioner, or rather than talk about it as somebody who, for me personally, it's a big part of my life, rather than talk about it like that, I want to talk about it as if we're sort of standing outside looking at it. The way maybe an anthropologist would talk about it, or a believing anthropologist, or that's actually a very bad example. Forget that. As an academic understanding of it. And I'm going to lay the groundwork today for the reason I'm going to do that. And hopefully, if we're patient with each other over the next several weeks and months, you'll understand why I want to do that. Now, before I jump in to paint this framework, the reason I called it Islamic spirituality, other than the reason that I just mentioned about names and all of that, is that religion is something that is supposed to be a personal experience as well as a public experience. So there's a personal aspect to our practice. I'm sure all of us at times we have turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help or assistance. We've had low moments or high moments. We must at times ask ourselves, what is the point of all of this? What am I doing? What is the greater answers to my predicament? We must have had these questions for ourselves. So you're not going to find those answers in a book of law, for example. If you look at fiqh, fiqh is very dry, it's mechanical. You're not going to find answers about that there. But the ulama before us, they answered all of these questions. And the reason I want to talk about it is I want to help us understand why this is nothing to be concerned about, why this is not like a new age thing, why this is not some kind of bid'ah, why this is not something that is, other than Islam. But what we're going to talk about is the heart of our faith. This is the heart of Islam. Is that how can this faith transform you as an individual and really inspire you to be the best version of yourself? That's my goal. And that's why I want to talk about it sort of, at least for the first half of these lectures, without titles and names and things like that, so people don't get confused. We'll get to all of the confusing stuff towards the end, but we need to I need to build up some capital with you so that I can draw down on that and spend that capital later. I don't want to talk about that stuff right now. So, and the third thing I want to say before I lay out the scheme is that I've noticed a little bit, but I'm sensing that this is happening, that there's a rejection of this topic or associated topics by Western Muslims. I see it that it's increasing. Not the attack that, this is bid'ah. No, I'm not talking about that stuff. That stuff is actually dying down. What I'm concerned about is this politicization of Islam, this over social justice activism, which has its role, not necessarily in the masjid, but it has its role as a Muslim, as a person of consciousness, etc. But people are substituting that for what we are going to talk about. What we are going to talk about, as I said, is the heart of Islam. This is why the Prophet ﷺ was sent to humanity. He was sent to humanity to rectify human character. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, I was only sent to refine human character. That's it. Everything in the Quran and Sunnah is about what we are going to talk about. How do you refine character? It's not necessarily to answer how you calculate the zakah when you have X number of camels or sheep, but that's part of our faith. But statistically, that stuff is a small percentage of what the Prophet ﷺ talked about. The extreme vast majority of what he talked about is human character. And the reason I think it's important to talk about it is I'm fearful with our younger people, younger Muslims. I fear that they think somehow that they're going to find their inspiration in that path of social justice and politics. You're not going to find the answers to those deep questions there. You're only going to find it in what we're going to talk about. I'm not saying that stuff is not important. It's important, but it's important for other reasons. It's not important for, you can't build your Islamic identity around that. And we can come back to that. So, having said that, I'm going to begin with the hadith of Gabriel, which we all know. And the hadith of Gabriel is a foundational hadith, it's a foundational text. And it's very important because in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ explains for us what our religion is made up of. At the end of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he turns to Sayyidina Umar and he says, do you know who that was? And Umar says, Allah and His Prophet know more best. He says, هَذَا جِبْرِيلٌ جَاءَ يُعَلِّمُكُمْ دِينُكُمْ. This is Gabriel, he has come to teach you your religion. Which means that everything that was mentioned in the hadith equals Islam. Islam equals these four questions that Gabriel asked. The first question he asked is, what is Islam? Then what is Iman? What is Ihsan? And then he asked about the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah. So when Gabriel asked the Prophet ﷺ, what is Islam? The Prophet ﷺ gave him the answer of the 5 pillars. He said, the testification of faith, that you pray, that you fast, your zakah, and your hajj once in your life if you are able to. Right? These 5 things that the Prophet ﷺ answered are all actions. They're all activities. They're all things you have to do. What is the subject in Islam that talks about those things? It's the Sharia. The Sharia answers the question of what should I do in this situation. The Sharia's concern is with human action. Af'al al-mukallifin, the actions of people that are morally obligated, us. So if you have a question, what do I do in this situation? How do I make wudu? How do I say my prayers? What happens if I come late to prayer? What happens if I'm traveling and it's Ramadan? What happens if can I pay for the Hajj with my credit card? What is riba? Is the interest in the bank riba? Can I take out a loan for my bank? All of marriage, divorce, all of those actions, our social interactions, our personal devotional actions, all of those are in the subject of the Sharia. That's what Islam equals. That's how it proliferated. When the Prophet ﷺ answered that way, he said, Islam is that you do these things. The Sharia developed to answer those questions. And in our history, we have about 1.5 million points of law that all of the jurists across all of them have talked about. If you look at the widest encyclopedia we have of Islamic law, there are about 1.5 million points of law, answers to those questions. And those 1.5 million points of law come from over 90 madhahib. We have over 90 schools of law throughout Islamic history. It's not just the 4 Sunni schools. Those are the most complete and the most articulate of the schools. But that's not all that we have in our history. Across the Sunni and the Shia spread, we have 90 schools of law, meaning there were 90 attempts to answer those questions. And that's a huge, very rich inheritance that we have. And you can spend several lifetimes just understanding all of that stuff. But all of that law and the usul, the methodology that goes into extracting those answers from the Quran and the Sunnah, that's what we call Islam. That's what we call the Sharia. But that's only part of the picture. Next, the Prophet ﷺ was asked by Gabriel, how about Iman, faith? And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Iman is that you have faith in, and tu'min bi, you have belief in. And then he gives the 6 articles of faith, that we believe in Allah, the prophets, the angels, the books, Yawm al-Qiyamah, the final hour, and we believe in qadr, in destiny, it's good and it's bad. Belief is something that is internal. It's a state of my heart. I believe in this. The way my mind is made up, the framework of my mind is I believe that Allah is one. And because I believe in La ilaha illallah, I also believe laysa kamithlihi shay', nothing is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I believe that Allah has all of these attributes, that He manifests through the world throughout these attributes. And the attributes are separate, but part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine essence. So on and so forth. Which means that I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything, and that everything is subservient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then I believe in Sayyidina Muhammad as the seal of all prophets. What does that mean? Was the Prophet divine? Was he a son of God that was given to us? We'll say, no, we don't believe in that. We believe that that is impossible, rationally impossible, that the divine can dwell in the finite, that the infinite can dwell in the finite. So on and so forth. Angels, what are the angels? We believe such and such. All of the books, were the books preserved, were they not preserved? What is our relationship with the Sharia that came before Islam, etc., etc.? All of these things are belief, are theology. Islam, the Sharia, deals with what we call orthopraxy, correct action. How do you act? How do you function mechanically? Theology deals with orthodoxy, correct belief. What is my correct belief versus my not correct belief? Meaning, how does my mind work? What do I believe in my heart vis-a-vis all of these things? But then Gabriel asked the Prophet something else. He said, what is ihsan? And ihsan in the Arabic language means to perfect, to beautify, excellence, all of these words and more. What is ihsan? What is perfection? After you have this action and you have this belief, how do you act all of that out? What is the perfect manifestation of that? And then the Prophet he said, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَهُوَ يَرَاكَ. That you worship Allah as if you see Him. And if you do not, know that He sees you. And that is what the subject matter of this series is about, is what does that mean? And we'll come to that in a second. And then Gabriel asked the Prophet a 4th question. He says, what are the signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah? What are the signs that all of this is going to come to an end? And then the Prophet he lays out some of the signs. Meaning that we need to know where we're going. We know where we've come from because we have these questions answered. We believe in God, in the angels, in the prophets. We believe in all of these things. But where are we going? What's the end of all of this? Is this going to keep going on forever? Is this just a series of cycles? The way that the Hindus believe, for example, that this is just one cycle of time and it will end and we will be in another cycle of time. And will we be reincarnated? Will I become a reincarnate of myself? Are you a reincarnate of a previous life? So that last question, the Prophet answers that for us. That no, there's a big scoreboard, and the time is running out. And at the end of this time, by the way, I'm going to let you know what are the signs that the scoreboard is coming to an end, to a close. What will happen after the scoreboard goes to zero, the time goes to zero? What will happen after the game? So then we believe in the things that will come. It's also part of our theology, which is why when we study theology, we also study those things. So again, the Prophet he tells Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu that this is our deen. Islam equals these things. There are people now that want to convince you that you cannot define Islam. I meet these people all the time. I meet them in the government. I meet them in the tech companies. We're trying to help these big, large tech companies remove some of the extremist materials from them. The big pushback that they give us is, you can't really define Islam. There's probably no more ludicrous statement than that. Islam has to equal something. We know that Islam equals these things. It's just one hadith. It's that easy. That Islam equals these things. And these things go on throughout Islamic history to become disciplines and multi-disciplines and several disciplines. The Sharia and fiqh emerged to protect our action. Our theology emerged to protect our belief. Just like the discipline of tazkiyah or ihsan or tasawwuf or spirituality, or whatever the word is that we use, also proliferated to protect this aspect of our faith. So what is this aspect of our faith? It's our individual practice of our religion, how it is expressed from us individually. This is why the Prophet ﷺ said to worship Allah as if you see Him. So it's not enough just to pray and to fast and to give your zakat or to go to Hajj. It's not enough just to do those things. It's not enough to just say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. But when you do that stuff, the Prophet ﷺ is saying you got to see God while you're doing that. And if that's too difficult, then at least know that He sees you. So it's the mode of us expressing our faith, practicing our faith, doing our faith. It's how we practice it. Now, all the things that we're talking about, all of the disciplines that emerged to protect Islam, to define and protect and preserve our religion, all of them are based on the Quran and the Sunnah. So any question that we have, we go back to the Quran and the Sunnah. There's no secret source that only I have to answer these questions. We all have the Quran and the Sunnah. It's very simple. Islam is a very transparent, thing. There's no secrets. So somebody asks, what do I do in this situation? Somebody asks, for example, Allah Ta'ala in the verse of the prayer and the wudu, He mentions wudu after the prayer. So shouldn't we pray first and then make wudu? How do we answer that question? So we go back, we look at the verse, we look how the verse is structured, we look at the words, we look at the letters, and then we look at the people before us. What did they understand? And they universally understood that the verse means you need to make, if you desire to pray, that's why Allah begins with the prayer. If you desire to pray, إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ, then you need to do these things, i.e. before the prayer. So the implied meaning is agreed. Again, it's Quran and Sunnah. And we have no hadith, no story from the seerah that the Prophet ﷺ prayed and then made wudu after the prayer. It's all, you make wudu and then you pray if you need to, for example. Then you have a question. Isn't there the power of evil? Isn't there an evil power in the world? So we go back to the Quran and the Sunnah. What do we know? What do we find? We find that the Prophet ﷺ taught us, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, is one of the treasures that come from the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no power. There is no ability except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we find in the Quran, Inna kayda shaytani kana da'ifa, that the machinations of Satan is weak. There is no power to Satan. If you're messed up, it's because you're messed up. If I make a mistake, I made a mistake. It's not that Satan made me do something. I'm the one that made the mistake. La hawla wa la quwwata illa. So why do good things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? And why do good things happen to bad people? So we go back to the Quran and the Sunnah. We see, what is our evidence for this stuff? Again, everything is based on the Quran and the Sunnah. But each generation that does that goes back to the Quran and the Sunnah, they had the courtesy of writing down for us their deductions and their thinking. So we, 14 centuries later, inherit all of that thinking, all of that experience, all of that writing, all of that intellectual history. We inherit all of that. So now we have the Quran and the Sunnah, but we also have the understanding of the people that came before us. We have the experience of the people that came before us. And this helps, not harms, our understanding. So we have, the Muslim world's greatest minds across all of the geography of Islam that have written about all of these things. I found one time, for just to show you an example of the kind of stuff that we have. I found one time, I was with one of my teachers, and somebody was asking about the Lawh al-Mahfuz, or something like, I don't know what the scenario was, but I remember my teacher saying, oh, the Lawh al-Mahfuz only has 10 lines on it. Where'd you get that? Where's the Quran and the Sunnah? It's my teacher saying this, but your instinct is when somebody says, even if it's your teacher, where did you get that? And he's like, oh, so-and-so in his book, the book is called An-Nawadir, Obscurities. He wrote that this was one of his insights, that the Lawh al-Mahfuz only had 10 lines. Somebody thought about that. He could be right, he could be wrong. But somebody took the time to reflect, how big is the Lawh al-Mahfuz? What does it look like? And his insight was that it had 10 lines on it. You have stuff like that all the time. You have strong stuff, you have weak stuff, you have stuff that you've never heard of before, but we have this tremendous history. Tremendous history. And as a matter of fact, the books that have been printed in Islam are a fraction of the books that are still in manuscript form of Islam. There's more in manuscript form than we actually have access to. And every year, more things are coming out in print, more things are coming out in print. If you got all of the commentaries, for example, on Sahih al-Bukhari, they would fill this entire mosque. All of the commentaries on one single book would fill just this mosque alone. You could have an entire house full of that one subject. You can imagine then what was been written about all this other stuff. So of course everything is based on the Quran and the Sunnah. But we have also inherited understanding that guides us. It doesn't behold us. We're not necessarily beholden to everything that has come before us, but we are guided by the people's understanding before us. And this brings up another part of the story, which is how our religion is passed on. And I'll finish this little part, and then we'll that's enough of a chunk for today. How is our religion passed? What becomes authoritative in our understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah? The Quran is there. The Sunnah, we have the Hadith books outside, at least the main books of Hadith. We have that. We're not gonna make that up. We know that. But how do I know that my understanding of this is correct? What becomes authoritative? And therefore what becomes non-authoritative and therefore incorrect and heretical? And this is why it's very important for us to understand, before we talk about everything we're going to talk about in this series, that our religion is passed generation to generation through chains of transmission. Al-Isnad, chains of transmission. There is nothing in this religion that is not verified and therefore connected back to the Prophet ﷺ. If there is something that is not verified and connected, it's most likely wrong. It's most likely by itself. Imam Muslim, when he came to put together his collection of hadith, he has an introduction, and he put this statement of Abdullah ibn Mubarak, who was one of the famous tabi'een, who said, rahimahullah, al-isnadu min ad-din, walawla al-isnadu laqala man sha'a ma sha'a. This chain of transmission is our religion. And were it not for the chain of transmission, anyone could say what they want. Think about that statement, how brilliant that statement is. Now, we're not only talking about the problem of social media, but now we're talking about deep fake. These videos that, if you've seen some of these deep fake videos, I mean, if you did not know that this was a fabricated video, you would believe that it looks real to me. But nothing can be said in the name of Islam, nothing can be said in the name of Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ, except that it is verified. It doesn't matter who's saying it. It has to be verified. And the way we verified our tradition, the way we verified the Quran, the way we verified the Sunnah, the way we verified the Sharia, the way we verified the Aqidah, the way we verified our Tasawwuf, is all through the chains of transmission. And anybody who teaches this religion has to be able to present their chain of transmission. Doesn't mean that I'm infallible, I can make a mistake, but what will correct me is this chain of transmission. will correct me are the people that taught me, and the people that taught them, the books that we inherit, so on and so forth. So everything that we talk about, when we say it's based on the Quran and Sunnah, we need to maybe restate it. It needs to be connected directly to the Quran and the Sunnah. That is how we weed out what is authoritative versus what is not authoritative. What is accepted versus what is debatable. What is immutable versus what can be, difference of opinion. Are these chains of transmission? There's not a science, there's not a discipline, except that it has a chain of transmission. Grammar, fiqh, usul al-fiqh, aqidah, all of these sciences, they have to have a chain of transmission. That one generation teaches one generation and it is passed each generation at a time. This is how the Quran was compiled. The Quran was compiled because two Sahaba had to verify each verse, where it fit in, the verse that came before it and the verse that came after it, and two Sahaba independently had to verify that they heard it from the Prophet's mouth, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Each line, each verse of the Quran, that's how it was put together in one mushaf. And the same thing with the Sunnah. The same thing with the Hadith. Many people, they think that the Muslims were sleeping until Imam al-Bukhari woke up and decided to put down the Hadith. Imam al-Bukhari inherited the generations before him. The Hadith were written at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and they were memorized and passed. All he did is he did a huge thing, but what I'm trying to say is what he did is he used what existed and then he wrote it down to codify it. But it's not like it wasn't done before. And they verified each text, each hadith, each recension of each hadith, because in Bukhari there's one hadith but it's narrated several times because it has different wordings. Each one is verified. And the Quran, as we know, has 10 recitations. So each recitation is verified. The script of the Quran is verified. So therefore, when I come to study in this discipline of action of Sharia, in my case, I studied the Shafi'i madhab. I'll tell you who I studied with, and I'll show you my chain going all the way back to Imam Shafi'i to Imam Malik, all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. Meaning that my understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah comes back to this verification method, so on and so forth. So this will be very important. All this stuff about the Hadith of Gabriel and all of these comments they're always going to be in the background. They're always going to be in the background throughout our discussion. So if we get stuck, or if we forget, or somebody comes like the third or fourth week and wasn't here, we'll always refer back to this text. The importance of these different aspects of our faith: action, belief, spirituality, verification, what it means that everything is based on the Quran and the Sunnah. We're always going to come back. It's like rule number one. If we ever get stuck, we're going to come back to rule number one, inshallah. And I'll leave it there for today. Any questions? Yes. Alaikum salam.
More maybe a comment kind of question. It's really about the verification and it goes to translation. For some people who are not from Arabic descent and don't understand the Quran and need the translation, it becomes very difficult to find the good translation. What's your advice on how to find the best translation? It is years to find the Quran that I really want to read because of that.
So translation is a big topic, and I, like you, I've also, unfortunately, maybe all of us, we found bad translations of things, and we found translations in which the translator's bias is inserted in brackets and things like that. So I would always look to who is the translator, and if the person is reliable, then most likely the translation is reliable, which, by the way, is exactly how the isnad system works. The process of verification in Islam is more concerned with the person speaking or the person passing on the information than what is said. In other words, if this person is honest and upright, then it's almost certain that whatever they're going to say is going to be true. Whereas in the Western world, it's a little bit reversed. What's more important is what is said, not who's saying it. So the early generation, they were concerned about the person themselves. How are they? Do they pray? How's their memory? Do they have good conduct? Do they have good character? If so, then I'm going to take the hadith from them. So it's the same thing in this situation. Who is the person translating this book or whatever the case, or the Quran or whatever? Is this person reliable? And there's no perfect translation. There's no perfect, effort. I know the study of Quran, for example, when it came out, a lot of Muslims, they made a big hoopla about it because there were some things they didn't like. That project, I remember hearing about that project when I was a graduate student. It's a miracle that HarperCollins took on this project and that we have a book, an effort like that over many scholars. All of the people that worked on that project are practicing Muslims. I know them personally. I prayed with them. I prayed behind Sayyid Hussein Nasr. He taught me Islam. I studied him for 7 years, or 5 years rather. It doesn't mean he's infallible. I'm sure the book has mistakes. It's all Bible paper and it's like 1,000 pages. I'm sure there are mistakes in the book, but it's a pretty good effort. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I trust him and the people that did that project. I would use that as a go-to, for the Quran, for example. Acknowledging that there might be mistakes, so on and so forth. So look to who the person is. Yeah.
This isn't really for me, this is just in general. Could you just comment more on the isnad process and could you just comment more on the isnad process a little more? Because I think what many West people in a Western audience assume is that because something is written, that automatically makes it superior to oral tradition, where they don't realize that written traditions can be just as biased or perhaps even more biased than an oral tradition. And I don't know, that's the impression I usually get from Western academic settings, where there's an assumption that because something's written or if something is oral, it automatically means it's unreliable, which is not not true necessarily.
So in the early part, so it's not really a question about isnad, it's really a question about the oral transmission versus the written transmission.
Right.
And which one is more accurate. In the formative period of Islam, of course, the isnad, the concept of isnad, it evolves over time. I don't need the isnad now to prove the veracity of the Quran. That's established. But rather, when I study how to read the Quran, and I'm given an ijazah, and I have a sanad, a chain of the Quran going back to the Prophet ﷺ, it just means that I'm part of that tradition. In the formative period, you needed that chain of transmission was used to verify.
Yeah.
It was like the blue check. It's verified now. The Arabian society at the advent of Islam was largely an oral society, not a written. It doesn't mean that they didn't write. They had things like the mu'allaqat on the Kaaba, the poems, and all of that kind of stuff. And the interesting fact is that both the Quran and the Hadith were written during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, on parchments and bones and things like that. It wasn't completely oral. It was both at the same time. So the real pushback for Orientalists that want to claim that the Sahaba, you can't rely on the early transmission because it was oral and written, is that that's incorrect.
Yeah.
That they were both happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. My thing is that these people you're never going to convince these people because they're just as biased as we are. Our bias is that we believe. Their bias is they want to sow doubt in the formative period so that therefore, do you really think that you're going to convince Muslims that the Sahaba messed up in transmitting the Quran? That's never going to happen. So their project is futile, and me trying to prove them is also equally futile. That's why we have that verse. Lakum dinukum waliya din.
Well, it's not just Orientalists. You receive so many questions Muslims didn't write Hadith until Sahih Bukhari, whatever, 200 years later. But the Hadith and Quran isn't primarily transmitted through writing. If all the Qurans in the world disappeared tomorrow, just hypothetically, there are Hufaz who memorize the entire Quran. They could just write it from memory because it's oral. And we understand it that way. So I don't know why.
So the original preservation of the text of Islam is oral.
Right.
When we say the Quran is preserved, we mean the way what we mean two things, but the first thing is we mean the way the Quran is recited is preserved. The way you pronounce the words, what we call now tajweed, the way that we recite the verses, why some letters are silent, why some are not silent, in its 10 canonical recitations, the way that it is spoken is preserved. And then that was written down, and the script is also preserved. Secondly, the same thing with the hadith. You know that, was that Indian scholar's name, Hamidullah? Muhammad Hamidullah. Muhammad Hamidullah, rahimahullah, he wrote this article, like in the late 70s or early 80s. There was this center in Germany before the war, and this center collected Quranic manuscripts from around the world, from all across time. So they had Islamic manuscripts from the 1st century up until, whatever, 1800s. And their goal was to, this big scheme to show the Muslims, look, you guys don't know what you're talking about, the Quran is made up, or, we found a missing juz or something like that. And they discovered that not one single manuscript, not one, had any discrepancy with the Quran. I mean, they found scribes' mistake, like somebody wrote a mistake, but in the margin they would correct it. I mean, human error, that's fine. There's no autocorrect when you're writing. But they found no discrepancy. No discrepancy. For us, we're like, told you so. But what's really strange is that center was magically bombed during the war. Now, where's all that stuff? Where's all that finding? I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but where is that center? Why was that bombed? That was the most important strategic target during World War II. So there is no discrepancy. Allah alone sends it and preserves it. And that's why we believe in the Quran. Because that's why we have so much confidence in it. Because, okay, show me the mistakes in the Quran. So the oral transmission, let us say, is primary, and then the written transmission is secondary. Both are preserved. Both are documented at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, all the way through the codification of the Mus'haf during the Khilaf of Abu Bakr and then Uthman radiallahu anhum, and then the canonization of the Hadith with Bukhari and the rest, and the 6 canonical collections later.
Right. I only bring it up because I don't want people to discount the oral tradition, because that is common in Western academia, and
Oh, but you're reminding me of something else. So the oral transmission. The oral transmission still exists.
Yeah.
In other words, no, not in the way you're thinking, in another way, which is when you study in that system of transmission, you don't just study the technical text and the answer. So you ask me a question according to the Shafi'i fiqh, and I give you an answer because I studied it. It's not just that. It's how you teach and how you practice and how you pass on Islam. That's the oral transmission, which is still an essential part. So Islam is passed on this way, through interaction, not just through the books. You can't just read and then become super Muslim. I mean, we know what happened when people try to do that. They've created a mess. But this interaction is important. Why is this interaction important? Because you learn from the teacher and the teachers, plural, how you talk about certain things, how you deal with certain things. Like something might be haram. It might be like 100% haram. But then you notice that the teacher never really makes a big deal about it. So why don't you make a big deal about it? He says, it's not wise, it's not the time, there's all this confusion. So you make a mental note, okay, not everything that I see that is wrong, I have to speak out about. I don't have to make people feel bad, but I can make people feel comfortable. So on and so forth. That's the oral tradition. And that's what's preserved up until now, and will be preserved until there are no more Muslims left. Is that how do you talk about the Quran and the Sunnah? That's what's important. All of those anecdotes, all of those stories. Yeah.
Could you explain the concept of mutawatir, why that gives us confidence in the authenticity of the Quran and Hadith?
So what mutawatir means is that it goes back to, there's a discipline of transmission, of how information is transmitted, passed on. The question that the ulama asked is, how many people transmitted this piece of information? Is it one person? who heard it from a tabi'i, who heard it from the Sahaba, who heard it from the Prophet. Okay, fine. It's one chain, but each of them are honest. So we'll take this text as sahih, it's sound, because we believe everyone in the chain is sound. But it's ahad, it's a singular transmission. But wait a minute, I found that same text, 20 other people transmitted it in different chains. So not only does that text become sound, it becomes mutawatir, meaning there are multiple chains that are all different, meaning that it is statistically impossible that all of those people came together to conspire to create a lie. So the sahihness of that text is higher than the first example, even though it's sound. This one is much higher. And the ulama differed. How many people have to transmit a piece of information for it to be mutawatir? Is it 20 people? Is it 10 people? Is it 8 people? That's not important. What's important is that the mutawatir means if something is mutawatir, if something is diffusely congruent, if something has been transmitted by that number of people, it's impossible, it's humanly impossible at that time, before communication, mass communication, that they all made that thing up. We use this all the time. Who here has been to the Maldives? Does anybody here deny you've been? MashaAllah. Now we know what's happening with all of the Ramadan donations. Is there any, other than Riyadh, is there anybody here that denies the Maldives exists? Why? Because it has been communicated to you through tawatur that there is a Muslim island that's sinking called the Maldives. That's what mutawatir means. So we use it all the time. And then we have somebody in our community who's actually been there, so he can tell you, so that adds to our belief. Now, no one would come in, if I told you that I don't believe that the Maldives exists. Just like if I told, okay, let me give you a more real example. Does anybody believe the earth is flat? You all believe the earth is round? But have you seen the earth be round yourself with your own two eyes? No, but you believe that the earth is round. No one, except some people, no one believes the earth is flat. Because we all know, we call it a fact. That's what the mutawatir is. The Quran has been narrated to us, every single verse in the Quran, through mutawatir transmissions. So there's no doubt, it's yaqeen, it's certainty. In the science of usul al-fiqh, we call it qat'iyyu dalala. Its proofness is absolute. There's no question after that. If something is transmitted singularly, it's still sahih, but it's not as strong. It could be dhanni ad-dalala. It could be its proofness is less powerful. What are some of the things from the hadith that have been narrated through tawatur? The return of Christ alayhi salam. The hadith of the Mahdi coming alayhi salam, for example. These are texts, these are hadith that are all mutawatir. So all of those Muslim reformists in like the 40s, the 1940s, the 1950s that try to explain away Christ coming back and then the Mahdi, there's no such thing as the Mahdi and stuff like that, they have a hard time because it's tawatur. It's like you denying one of the verses of the Quran. That's what mutawatir means. So therefore, the confidence that it gives me when something is mutawatir, there's nothing higher than that. That's like the Quran. It's absolute. Its proofness is absolute. It's like the earth being round. No question. Yeah. Alaikum salam.
Could you please explain the importance of madhab?
Madhab just means school. All of the disciplines that we talked about, they all have different schools. So there are madhabs in fiqh, there are madhabs in theology, and there are madhabs in tazkiyah. The madhabs in fiqh, in the law, which is maybe what we're more used to hearing, simply mean that each school of law has a scheme of interpreting the Quran and the Sunnah. I follow the scheme that Imam al-Shafi'i laid down. So I'm a Shafi'i, meaning that I follow his scheme and I also follow, for the most part, his conclusions of what the Quran and the Sunnah tell me how to act in certain situations. Imam Abu Hanifa, he has a different scheme. What are the differences between those schemes? Very slight difference. They all, of course, believe in the Quran and the Sunnah. They all uphold consensus ijma', But there are other ways. I'll give you an example. You come into the mosque late on Friday because you see that I'm on the roster, so you're like, this guy's going to ramble on, so I'll go late. And my khutbahs are around 23 minutes, so you can time like when the prayer is going to start. Now you walk into the mosque late. I'm just kidding, by the way. And I come late. Do you pray the sunnah or do you don't pray the sunnah? Who prays the sunnah while Tarek is rambling? We have one. We have no. Pray the sunnah. Well, these are my students. I have to pray the sunnah. Which one is right and which one is wrong? They're both right. Because there's a hadith in Bukhari called the hadith of Sulaik. Sulaik was a Sahabi. The hadith goes that Sulaik came to the mosque while the Prophet ﷺ was giving the khutbah, and he sat down, and then the Prophet ﷺ stopped the khutbah and he said, Sulaik, stand and pray the 2 rak'ahs. So Sulaik stood and prayed the 2 rak'ahs. Imam al-Shafi'i, he says, you see, this hadith of Sulaik, you have to pray the 2 rak'ahs, even if the khatib is starting. And then Imam Malik, he says, you see, the hadith of Sulaik, that means that you shouldn't pray the 2 rak'ahs. It's the same hadith. Imam al-Shafi'i's scheme is that he takes the prima facie meaning of the hadith. I don't need to interpret that hadith, it's very straightforward. Imam Malik says, no. I lived in Medina with all of the descendants of the companions, and nobody in Medina did that. And when I investigated that hadith, I found out that Sulaik was poor, and he would come to the mosque in town because the rich Sahaba would support him. Because he came late, the Prophet ﷺ didn't want the other Sahaba to forget that he was in town, so he made him stand up, so that the Sahaba would see him out of the Prophet's mercy for Sulaik. So Imam Malik says that this hadith is specific for Sulaik. Imam Shafi'i says this hadith is general. That's an example, for example, of law. What are the madhabs? What are the schools in theology? We have 2 schools in theology. We have the Ash'ari school and the Maturidi school. The Ash'ari school is the predominant school. The Maturidi school is a minority school. They're both essentially the same. The differences between them are all linguistic differences. The Maturidis, they grew up more in the lands in Transoxania, the lands east of the Oxus River, amongst the Hanafis. The Ash'aris are the other schools. So we have the 90 schools of Islamic law, we have the 2 schools of Islamic theology, and then we have a gazillion schools of tazkiyah. And all of those schools, all of those madhabs are called paths. Tariqa or Turq. We have the Qadiris, we have the Naqshbandis, we have the Rifa'is, we have the Chistis, we have the Khalwatis, we have the Shadri, we have the Suhrawardi, all of those different, they say that the number of those madhabs equal the number of human beings. And that's one of the things that we're going to get to why we have that statement. That's what madhab means. It means a systemized way of thinking or acting or believing in a certain subject. That's all it means. Yes? Tazkiyah is purity, or to purify. If you purify the milk, you remove the cream from the top of the milk. Or if something falls in the butter and you take it to zeki, you take it out, you purify it. So spirituality or purification is called tazkiyah because we remove the negative attributes or the negative traits that exist in us so that we can be pure. That's all it means.
I have 2 questions. And with the Senate, let's say hypothetically someone who has like wrong beliefs or some new things decides to go and sit with the sheikh and get some ijazah and a Senate from that sheikh. And then later on, let's say, moves to a different place, more like his community somewhere else, and then he goes and preaches his own wrong understanding, but still shows his ijazah and sanad, and he got it from, let's say, a great scholar. How can that person be disproved?
The way a person can be disproved, even if they studied in this tradition with the ijazah and sanad, is the community of scholarship. The community, the academic community, the scholarly community, this is what passes authority from generation to generation. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said that my ummah will not come to an agreement on something that is incorrect. So we believe in the infallibility of the community, the isma of the community. That if the Muslim ulama collectively get together and decide on something, we believe that decision was guided. So if somebody emerged like that, and this happened in the past, the community of the ulama respond. They either if the person has passed away, they write about them. They say this is bid'ah, this is wrong, and then that's passed on from generation to generation. So then you know that this is incorrect. And there are many people like that. It's not like it's not like an isolated thing. It happens all the time.
And the second question is,
but in Islam, in our community, we don't have like a pope, somebody who would ultimately say, this is it, right? So when you say that the community is ultimately the final arbiter, how does one accept that? Say, for instance, if there is disagreement.
So the community, we don't have a pope, that's correct, which ultimately is a good thing,
Yeah.
I believe. But when I say the community is the arbiter, I mean the community of scholars. It's not like in Protestantism where it's like the priesthood of all believers. It's not all of us. In scholarly matters, I mean it's the opinion of it's the community of the scholars. Now, to get the community of scholars to agree to something is also very difficult. So when the community of scholars don't agree and they have a difference of opinion, then that means that there's a difference of opinion, and then we inherit that difference of opinion. But when something is so blatantly wrong, and they say, no, this is wrong, like, all this terrorism stuff. I mean, nobody from the scholarly community today has endorsed any of that stuff. So that's a quick no-brainer. They universally say, well, this is incorrect. And we speak out against it. So that becomes binding. That becomes, we accept that form. And it's going to be rare over time. So it's not draconian by any means. Who is a mufti? The mufti is somebody who can use the tools, the schemes that I just mentioned, the tools, the interpretive tools of usul al-fiqh, and can take that and go back to the Quran and the Sunnah and derive rulings and give opinions to people for circumstances that they're dealing with now. So it's a technical skill set, and there are different types of muftis. There's a mufti within one school. There's a mufti that can do ijtihad completely, from the Quran and the Sunnah, or can reconcile between the different schools. So when somebody has a problem, like there's a blind Muslim that comes to the mosque with a service dog. That's a situation. So what do we do? So you ask the mufti, and the mufti says, oh no, this is okay because we can take the opinion of Imam Malik that the dog is not najis, for example. So the mufti helps you take an opinion, even if it's not your standard opinion, to be able to apply it in your current circumstance. It's not binding, the fatwa is not binding, but it helps you, they reconcile for you those legal differences so you can prefer one. Like when you ask me, for example, about the imam in the Eid prayer. Does the imam have to be at the front of the line? In all of the madhabs, yeah, except Imam Malik. Imam Malik says that it's not a condition. So we could take that opinion out of necessity, because we have a necessity in this mosque, because there's nowhere else for the imam to go. And the chairs they get up front, for example. So that would be an example of a fatwa process where we would prefer one opinion over another. You had another question?
And does the Quran, if you compare the Quran and Mutawatir Hadith, does one take precedence of another? And also, what if a Quran verse can clash with the Mutawatir Hadith? What happens in that?
Well, the Quran is always going to be primary over the Hadith. So the Quran is the first go-to to establish something. As far as the apparent differences between the Quran and the Quran, or the Quran and the Hadith, or the Hadith and the Hadith, this is why you need usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh deals with ta'arud al-adillah, when the proofs are quote-unquote contradictory. Is it abrogated? Is one general and one is specific? is one complete and one is partial. All of these different categories, when we study usul al-fiqh, you'll see all of those different categories help us, and like the hadith of Sulaik. Imam Shafi'i said that this hadith is general, but Imam Malik said that this hadith is specific. If something is specific, where is the mukhassis? What makes it specific? So Imam Malik, he says, I know the biography of Sulaik. It's such and such and such and such. So how you deal with the contradictions between the text is you have to know the science of usul al-fiqh to understand how you weigh the evidence. I mean, that's very complicated, but that's where you do it in usul al-fiqh. Yeah.
I was curious about how when you shift between you have to stick with one or what's
Okay, do you have to follow a madhab or not follow a madhab? If you're a student, you have to follow a madhab because you can't study a subject unless you study a subject. So I can't say I'm going to study the law and not study the law. Do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense. If I'm going to study biology, I have to study biology. So if I'm studying fiqh, I have to study a madhab. When you study a madhab, the more you study, the more you start to understand the other opinions. But if you're not a student, if you're just a regular Muslim, you follow the opinion that your teacher gives you. If there's an imam at the mosque, or there's a mufti, or there's somebody who's trained, and you ask them, your madhab is what they tell you to follow. Can you follow different opinions from the different madhabs? Yes, this is called talfiq. You follow one practice in one madhab and one practice in another madhab, but it has conditions. And because these things can get complicated, you go back to your teacher, and if your teacher says, yes, you can do this, then that's what you follow, it's on them. If your teacher says, no, you can't do this, then you comply to the best of your ability. But for the general Muslim, you don't have to concern yourself with any of the stuff that we're talking about. That stuff is like in the weeds. You don't have to worry about that. That would be too much for you, too much of a burden to bear. Which is why, by the way, I don't teach fiqh in the mosque. I did in the beginning, and then I realized it's going to create too much confusion, so I backed off. These guys are crazy, so they study fiqh with me. That's on them now. Now they're stuck. So now I can tell them you're doing something wrong. But all you guys, just take it easy. Inshallah. Air-conditioned Islam. Yeah.
Today in khutbah, said something about how to make wudu with a small amount of water. Are there any videos available that can be shared? Because it's challenging to make wudu by yourself with a cup of water.
Okay, maybe we can create a video
Yeah, I think that
of how to make wudu from a cup of water. Because you would be surprised. Water can go a long way. ICCP video, closed circuit video. But when I was there, I used to think it was impossible. Then I realized, I think I was on a plane when the kids were really young, and one of the kids dumped water on me. And it was a small amount of water, but that small amount of water ruined everything. And I realized that a small amount of water goes a long way. So you can make it last. But there's a way, you're right. There's a way you do it. So we can create, maybe when the weather is nicer, we can have demonstration outside.
Especially when we went to Umrah, Dilshad obtained one of those wudu jugs, very small. So Fatima, you can tell your mom to bring it here.
A wudu jug.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, good. Yeah.
If you can map it up to right.
Okay, so yeah, let's do it. Let's learn to make wudu. I mean, all of us can benefit. We'll have a wudu session outside. Who can make wudu with a cup of water?
you will do that.
Yeah.
There are many scripts of the Holy Quran. One script is Roman script, the Hijaz script, and some Philippine script. Which one is the authentic one?
There's only one script of the Quran. It's called the Uthmanic script. You're referring to the font. The way the letters are written, like the subcontinent Mus'haf, it looks more like the Urdu. But it's the same script. When I say script of the Quran, we mean the spelling of the words. Like, in some words, you write the alif. In some words, you don't write the alif. That's the script. That's what we mean. So the mushaf, for the mushaf to be the mushaf, it has to be written in the Uthmanic script. And there are rules for that. It's like a science. It's a discipline all into itself, to learn how to write the mushaf. And there are all of the major Muslim countries that print the mushaf. They have a committee of scholars that's their expertise, and they ensure before the mushaf is printed that the script is in concordance with the rules of the Uthmanic script. So don't confuse script with font. It's actually more, what's the technical, orthography? Does anyone know that word? Orthography, is it? The science of the writing of the Mus'haf, it has like a technical English language. Not calligraphy, that's like to make it. What? Orthography. Orthography, yeah. So it has to have one orthography. Maybe that's better than script. I can't even pronounce the words. I'm going to say the script because it's easier.
So I don't think that's
Oh, okay. I might even be wrong. Okay. Scrap orthography or orthodoxy or whatever it is. If what's true. What about Ottoman script?
meaning when it was written in other scripts doesn't mean.
No, the Quran can be written in other scripts, but then it ceases to be the Quran of the fiqh. So when I talk about the definition of the Quran, it is what is in between the two covers of the Mus'haf, beginning with the Fatiha, ending with the Nas, written in the Uthmanic script. All of the rules of the Quran about touching it with wudu, about touching it when a woman has her period, about touching it when all of that has to do with that. Which is why the Muslims wrote the Mus'haf in the Quran in other scripts. You see what I'm saying? So no, you can write the Quran in other scripts. But the technical definition of the technical Mus'haf is written in the Uthmanic script. That's what I mean.
If that translation, it's okay, you take that from the bathroom.
I would never take the Quran in the bathroom, ever.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, so
Just the Arabic one.
yeah, what makes the Quran no longer the Mus'haf? If the writing, additional writing in that volume is more than the writing of the original script. So let's say like one of those English translations. The Arabic is there, but then the translation and the commentary is more than the Arabic. That is no longer the Mus'haf of the fiqh. Yeah. But if you're traveling, for example, and you have a Quran in your bag, you have to take the Quran into the bathroom because where are you going to leave your bag? Don't leave your bag outside and say the Imam said I can't, because they're going to destroy that bag in like a split second. I'm not going to be there to defend you on that one. You have to take the bag into the bathroom. It's okay because you have to protect the Muslim. Yeah.
Yes, talking about script, I'm talking about the alphabet, and it has to be Arabic alphabet and something.
Yes, it has to be for it to.
So the script is really what we're talking about, the alphabet, Arabic alphabet.
The alphabet and the spelling of the words.
Yeah.
Where?
The system of spelling.
The system of spelling. Orthography. Okay. Orthography. Yeah. So some words are spelled differently in the Quran. The same word. Or they're spelled differently the way than we would write it in normal Arabic. So there's a reason why certain words are like that, and that's what we mean by the Uthmanic orthography. It's a whole subfield of Quran. Yeah. How was your exam?
So, I saw this video of this Moses prophet. He said this one thing. He said, for example, Muslims, he was making fun of us, and he said, you Muslims, you basically say, he said the same, and he was telling other people on his YouTube channel. He said, It says, may Allah have you go to hellfire, may you be brought into death and this and that. He was like, as Muslims, how does that help in the prayer? For example, prayer is your connection with God. You're talking to Him, and you're telling Him, yo, Allah should go to hellfire, you should run. He was like, ask them, that's what they do day and night, because most of the Muslims only recite 3 to 5 verses of Quran in their daily namaz. So he was saying, if every Muslim that's what they're reciting for having connection with God, it doesn't make sense. Because all you're doing is, Allah, you should go to hellfire. May your wife be destroyed and you be destroyed. So how would you answer that kind of a question?
Salama. There is no end to stupidity. I mean, that's just retarded. I mean, so was that Al-Hamdi?
No, that's one from Turkey.
Salama, bro. There's nothing to say to that.
Well, a lot of people came.
Don't pray. You don't want to pray. Don't pray. You don't want to read the Quran. Don't read the Quran. I want to read the Quran. I want to pray because I want to get to paradise. This person doesn't want to get to paradise. Salama. May Allah guide you. I mean, really, if you stop to respond to all of this stuff, we go crazy. I love that verse. Salama.
Can you explain Salama to those who do not hear last time?
So Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. When stupid and ignorant people speak to you, you say salama, peace. But you have to say it that way, exactly the way it's salama. I'm gonna make like these T-shirts or these hats. Salama, salama, bro. I mean, really, that's ridiculous. That surah is a miracle. Tabbat yada Abi Lahab. It's a miracle because had Abu Lahab wanted to disprove the Prophet ﷺ, he would have said his shahada after hearing those verses. The miracle of the Quran is that he was damned to hellfire while he was alive, and there was nothing he can do about it. Which proves to us that this is from Allah, it's not from the Prophet ﷺ. And that's a miracle. It's a miracle. And the Quran is the eternal, uncreated speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not a newsreel. So, why don't we just read Rumi in the prayer? Because it makes me feel good, not the Quran. It doesn't work like that. Right? Because the Quran is the Arabic of the Quran is a liturgy. It's something that we recite verbatim. Every letter in it is miraculous. Every verse, every letter has meaning. This surah is so powerful. And you know what's even more interesting about Abu Lahab? In Sahih al-Bukhari, there's a hadith that Abbas, I believe, saw Abu Lahab in a dream after he passed. And he said, what happened to you? He said, I'm screwed, man. I'm in the hellfire. We didn't say that, but you know what I mean. He said, except every Monday, I'm given a little bit of water like this. Every Monday, I'm given a little bit of water. Because on the day in which the Prophet ﷺ was born, I freed my slave girl Thuwayba. So he is rewarded, even though he was damned in the hellfire eternally from the Quranic text. Allah Ta'ala gives him this water because he expressed happiness at the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. How about us who are happy all the time, believing in La ilaha illallah, not believing in that, not you, but that nonsense? We ask Allah Ta'ala to save us, with our love of the Prophet ﷺ. Inshallah, we'll make the Salama t-shirts. This is an easy way to deal with things. Salama.
But how would you, I have this guy, right? And he's really into Islam. And he asked me this question about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, there's this, the non-Muslims, they made a big deal out of it. For us, it is totally fine. I agree with it. But I don't know how to explain it to him. Said,
what is it?
It is about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to have a bowl for the urination under his bed. And then this girl, the slave girl, she drank it, and then in the morning, Prophet said, indeed you will save yourself from the hellfire. So he said, how come a human can save somebody from hellfire? Explain to me through science. Which I really can't. I mean, there's no answer there.
Okay, fine. Did she know that this was the urine of the Prophet ﷺ? Or did she drink it by accident? She drank it by accident. That's the key to the hadith, right? This, believe it or not, this was a huge, huge controversy when I was working in Durham. If this was a huge controversy, the Egyptian media, because the Mufti was asked this question about the urine of the Prophet ﷺ, it became like this scandal, and it was all over the news. I mean, ridiculous. The key to the whole hadith, and the hadith is sahih, is she didn't know that this was the urine. She drank it. But we believe that everything in the Prophet ﷺ is pure. There is nothing in him that is impure. That is one of our beliefs. Nothing comes out of him except that it is pure. Even his blood, even though our blood is considered ritually impure, najasa, you know, the blood of when it comes out of the body, it's najis, but not the blood of the Prophet. This is one of his khasa'is, one of his special attributes. That nothing came out of the Prophet ﷺ except that it was pure. The Prophet ﷺ was napping one day, and I think it was Anas's mother, I think it was Anas. He woke up and he found her like underneath like the bed where he was like, what are you doing? He said, I'm collecting your sweat. Because it smells so good, we mix it with our tib, with our perfume. Even his sweat smelled beautiful. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That's our belief. You don't like it, salam. You don't believe it, that's fine. You don't have to believe in it. But it's not about science. It's about Allah Ta'ala chose this person, made him pure. Allah can do whatever he wants. If Allah wants to make everything in him pure, he can. And by the way, we believe the same thing for the other Anbiya as well, not just Sayyidina Muhammad. But this is our belief in all of the Anbiya. Because the Anbiya are not heroes. The Anbiya are archetypes. The Anbiya are examples. We see them, we follow them. The hero, you don't follow the hero, you get inspired by the hero. I can be the hero. I can fall and I can pick myself, dust myself up, and I can be the hero. But that's not the Prophet. And he's beyond that. You are on top of all of human character. He's the definition of human character. So how can Allah Ta'ala not make him pure? That's our belief. And look, not everything in religion is going to be compatible with the modern world. I mean, that sounds strange. I wouldn't make a khutbah on that. I only mentioned it because you asked. There are some things that are just not compatible. Keep salama in your back pocket, man. It will save you. Now, last one.
Yes, just to clarify what you said, Ya Rasulullah had 10 medical gifts. Nobody had that. Ya Rasulullah doesn't have a child. When you walk on the ground, nobody can see his footprints. The bag never touched his body. So when this person talk about it, I cannot say that it's so cute to use that word. Even the ground cannot show him. His enemy tried to collect that. He was nowhere to see that in the earth. When he was born, he always had his many therefore was no way to
What you're talking about are called khasa'is, the special attributes of the Prophet ﷺ. There are more than 10. And not all of them are firmly established. Some say, for example, the Prophet ﷺ didn't have like you said, a shadow, and not all of these are as strong hadith as the hadith we were talking about here. But all of them collectively remind us that the Prophet ﷺ is a human being, but not like us. And I believe one of the khasa'is, I think maybe the khasa'is of Imam Suyuti has been translated into English. If you want to read about this subject, about what are the special traits or attributes of the Prophet ﷺ, you can look. Having said that, because tonight is the night of the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, and as we usually used to end the classes, let us do some prayers on the Prophet ﷺ. We'll read the prayer of Imam al-Shafi'i. We'll read it 3 times, inshallah, to commemorate the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. اللهم صل أفضل صلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. اللهم صل أفضل صلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. اللهم صل أفضل صلاة على أسعد مخلوقاتك سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكرهم الغافلون. Imam al-Shafi'i, he wrote this book called Al-Risala, which is the first book that was written in the science of Usul al-Fiqh. And in the beginning of his book, he has this prayer on the Prophet ﷺ. And Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam al-Bayhaqi, he wrote a book about Imam al-Shafi'i after Imam al-Shafi'i passed away. And in the book, Imam al-Bayhaqi, he narrates this story that Imam al-Shafi'i was seen after he passed away, and he was asked, what happened to you? He said, Allah Ta'ala has forgiven me for everything. He said, why? He said, because I came up with this formula, this prayer on the Prophet ﷺ that no one else has come up with. So in our classes in Al-Azhar, we used to end the class with this prayer, any class. Not just because we're Shafi'i, but it became like a tradition in the Azhar. Even when the student used to go for the oral examination, and the sheikhs were testing the student, and the student wanted to know what would happen, all of the sheikhs would start with this salawat, that means the student had passed. If they tell the student something else after the class, after the test, that means they failed. So this became a tradition, because Imam al-Shafi'i is buried in Cairo. So this became a tradition. We used to do it at the end of the classes, and then I lost track. I don't know why I lost track of it, but inshallah we'll continue to do it. It's an easy prayer, and it has a lot of meanings. Any prayer on the Prophet ﷺ is good. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.